Hi everyone, my name is Stefanie Kopp, and my advisor for this project was Ashley Mears, so I just have to thank right away. She's been super helpful in the formation of all of this. And what I'm going to be talking about today is this topic, which I called Makeup's True Colors, the Implications of Foundation Shade Ranges. Before I jump in, just for those of us in the room who are not as familiar with makeup, foundation is the product that you put all over your face to even out your skin tone and essentially creates a blank canvas, but it also, it also just, it's supposed to match your skin. So that's kind of the key aspect here. I want to launch into why I approached this project. First of all, I'm really passionate about makeup, and it's an industry and an art form that I really believe in. But also at the same time that I was starting the formulation of this project, Rihanna launched her line Fenty Beauty. And this essentially just changed the game in terms of what consumers were expecting from brands when they released foundation products. So in September of 2017, they launched 40 shades of foundation right from the get-go, which was really rare leading up to this, and it was something that consumers had already been pressuring existing brands to do when they launched these complexion lines. And it was hugely successful. The deepest shades were selling out all over at Sephora. They were sold out on Fenty's website within days of the launch. And this started to really roll this tide of, hey, you should be doing this because people are going to buy it. So the consumer expectations were raised to another level because here's the proof that this can and does work. So what I wanted to look at was essentially a market snapshot. I looked at foundation ranges on the bestseller list at Walgreens and Sephora, so I was looking at things that we know that people are buying, and I'm looking at what is the number of shades that are available in these products, and I also wanted to look at how are they naming these products. Typically, each color in a foundation shade range has a name attached to it, and these can actually have implications that are racialized and indicate the way that Western beauty standards have been imposed on particularly women of color, particularly Black women. So my theoretical sociological foundation of this was this theory of racial grammar, basically unspoken rules about how we think about race. And my argument is that the way that these brands are naming their shades contributes to and is part of that racial grammar. So I'm looking at what does the market look like right now, but also what does that mean? What are the implications for that on a larger scale? So first, I wanted to create a distinction between the shopping experience at Sephora and Walgreens, since these are the two retailers that I was looking at. First of all, there's an issue of access here. Walgreens has about a little less than 10 times more stores than Sephora does. And of this number that I have up here of Sephora stores, over half of those are smaller Sephora locations inside of JCPenney stores. Also, when you're going to a Sephora, you're typically going to a mall. You're typically going, and if it's not in a mall, it's on some sort of high street where there's high fashion, et cetera, et cetera. Not everyone has access to these locations right from the get-go. Second of all, we're also looking at an access issue of price. We have of the foundations I looked at, we have around an average price of about $40 versus at Walgreens around $10. So there are various things that might prevent people from accessing the Sephora shopping experience, at which you'll have, if you're going into a Sephora, you have salespeople that are coming up to you who've been trained to help you find your color. Do they always do a good job? No, but that's part of their job description. Walgreens doesn't always have that. And even if you are at a Walgreens that has a beauty advisor, they're not going to have tester products for you to actually put the product on your skin and see. So where there's a lot more access to a Walgreens location, there's not necessarily the amount of consumer assistance, and as we'll get into it, the amount of choice at that kind of location. So first of all, I was looking at the number of shades at drugstore ranges first. So we see here, I hope you can see the numbers, we have 3 brands that have reached that 40 shade mark that Fenty Beauty kind of has set that standard at. And you'll notice I have 2 ranges that have an asterisk next to the name. That means that they extended their shade range as a result of consumer demand. And then the only other one that hit that 40 shade mark was the CoverGirl, which came out after Fenty. That came out in the end of 2018, I believe. Additionally, I've ranged these from lowest price to highest price, just to get a sense of what we're looking at in terms of price point and choice. So moving on to the Sephora ranges, similar thing. We only have a few brands that have hit the 40 shades, but we're getting a little bit closer. So we're seeing more in the drugstore, we were seeing a lot of in the 20s. We're seeing more in the 30s here. So we're getting closer, but it's still not quite there. And again, we have some shade extensions. Some of these have come out after Fenty, and a lot of these brands have been really heavily critiqued for their shade ranges already. So this is what we're looking at in terms of just the basic numbers. I do want to get into a little bit of a case study of what can happen when a brand launches something that is not going to meet these standards that are now set. So this picture here is a picture of the initial shade range. This was the first picture that actually came out for this product called the Tarte Shape Tape Foundation. What's really interesting about this is it was kind of piggybacking off of a complexion product that they had already released, the Shape Tape Concealer, which was this really, really favorite product of a lot of influencers, and it had a great shade range already. So people expected a lot from this, and they had a lot of hype around it. But then what happened was they released this, and we see 13 shades of beige and a couple others designed for everybody else. So people were furious about this, and Tarte apologized, essentially saying, we have more shades in the vault, but we just really wanted to get this product out quickly, which didn't fly for a lot of people because it suggests, hey, we think we can succeed in this launch without including people of color. So the foundation ended up selling horribly. The launch was delayed, and when it did eventually get to stores, it was constantly on sale for 50% off and was eventually pulled from the shelves. Then earlier, can't remember if it was this year or the end of 2018, but they released a new foundation piggybacking off of this saying, you asked, we listened, very pandering slogan, coming out with a new foundation with 50 shades. So did they learn from their mistake? Yes. Was it a mistake? Absolutely, and it really impacted the sale of this product, and this new product that came out is not doing that great either. So essentially this just shows that it actually does really affect brands now, and it shows the impact of these raised expectations. So now I want to get into the naming mechanisms a little bit. I categorize this in 3 different ways. I called these, if you use words for the names of your shades, I called this more creative names because they tend to be flashy. There are other brands that just use a number, or there are brands that use some combination of both. Some brands also use a letter to indicate undertone, which is just another way to determine what shade of foundation you use. So we see across the board there are lots of different combinations, but overall about 2/3 of the brands are using these what I called creative names, and every single one of those brands that uses these naming mechanisms does use names that are food themed, which is what I was really interested in. So the significance of these food-themed names is that they tend to have motifs of coffee and chocolate, particularly in these deeper shades, and they're mostly only used in the deeper shades. Coffee and chocolate were key products in the slave trade, which already creates this really problematic, interesting connotation for what are we actually talking about when we're labeling people's skin tones this way. And they're also in a sharp contrast to terms that are used for lighter shades, such as porcelain and ivory, which were these coveted materials, symbols of wealth, versus something like we see up here, espresso, latte, truffle kind of like these decadent, fleeting symbols of pleasure that are really reinforcing the exoticization of particularly Black bodies that has been really brought forward through Western beauty standards. And finally, these names are useless to consumers because they don't tell you anything about what somebody's skin tone actually looks like. Nobody's looking at their skin and thinking, I know that I look like mocha, therefore I must be this color. That's not necessarily going to work for you. So my argument is, why use these names if it's not actually going to help consumers in any way? And we can see it's not even as simple as just using words like coffee and chocolate. It gets more, we have spicy brown up there, which I thought was a really interesting one. And this is this is pulled from the Maybelline website. These are the deepest shades of their Fit Me Matte and Poreless foundation, and this is really, really common. So essentially my recommendations that I ended up with were, start by using Fenty as a benchmark. I'd like to see brands viewing the 40 shade marker as more of a minimum rather than something that they will maybe hit if they extend their shade range or X, Y, or Z. They should be starting off looking at this, and they shouldn't get lower than 30 shades because when you get into that, it just becomes really difficult to even try to think about including everyone. Second, I think these more creative names, as I've dubbed them, should be avoided altogether because, again, they're not helpful and they just reinforce these negative stereotypes. And my suggestion is to instead use a number plus letter format to indicate depth with the number and undertone with the letter, so that people can actually figure out, based on whatever is used as a naming mechanism, what shade to buy. A little easier than if you're just looking at, nobody knows if they're, even in the paler shades, nobody knows if the difference between classic ivory and just ivory, what does that mean? So my argument is make it helpful to consumers, and I'd like to see the industry move in a better direction as far as inclusivity and just more of a direction of empowerment rather than reinforcing these stereotypes. So that's it for me. I'd love to take any questions if anyone has them. Thank you so much for listening. Yeah.
This might be like out of scope.
Yeah, totally.
But, I'm just wondering, are there like limitations on why you can't release 200 colors?
Yeah, so starting off with, there's obviously the financial aspect of investing into that many shades. There's also an issue of how many units are actually allowed to be placed in a retail location. So something that is a pretty common problem is people will have a larger shade range. This Maybelline range that I had up on the last slide was actually an example of this. They'll have a larger shade range up on their website than they'll have in a store. This is a particular problem at drugstores. Less of a problem at Sephora and Ulta, stores like that. So there is like a physical limitation on it too, which again is not the case for online shopping. The problem with this is that this is a product that's really hard to shop for online, because you're only seeing pictures like this, which doesn't necessarily give you an accurate depiction of how that might match your actual skin. So I haven't gotten into, in my paper I touch on the idea of how many SKUs are allowed to be carried in a store, just for a little bit. That's something that I think needs to be explored further in the market. And actually recently, a CEO of a really popular brand was talking about that and how she was having to fight with the retailers to get more. She wants to release 50 shades and she wants to get them all in the stores, and that's been a really big battle. But because of the hype of Fenty, they were able to launch with 40, and at Sephora, that's a little more doable. So yeah, just a long-winded answer to your question, but yes, there are reasons, but there are lots of workarounds. Anybody else? Thank you for the question. What's up, Cole?
Why were brands pre-Fenty not including the deeper shades?
Just on a very basic level, I think brands legitimately did not think that if they made more varied, deeper shades that they would sell, because just on a numbers standpoint, Black women are who they might be catering to might be a minority population, so that I think is where it's coming from. The issue is that there are still those people out there who want to buy that product. And actually, there are other studies, this is part of what inspired my project as well, that state that Black women actually spend about I forget what the exact number is, but they spend more on average than white women do on various cosmetic products. So they are actually a really big part of this market that people were not taking advantage of. So now that people saw the success of these deeper shades in the Fenty range, people are moving forward to try and include them more. But before that, I think it was literally just not selling. I'm sure there are that also has its own racial implications, because it suggests that you can have this product that is, at its core, it's about race to an extent, because it is literally your skin color, and that you can launch it without including these other skin tones who are out there in the world and exist. This is a particular problem actually at really luxury brands. Brands that are releasing like $100 foundations will typically come out with 5 shades. And they're typically all shades of beige, because they think that's the only person that can buy their product. So there are lots of things that go into how brands decide, all of which are pretty misguided. So that's where I think it comes from, just from my knowledge of the industry. Yeah, Josh.
I think this is an amazing topic, especially in an industry that is based on skin color. I wanted to talk about your second recommendation. So
yeah,
I totally agree with avoiding those names because they can perpetuate harm. But in a practical sense, how would you be able to convince someone in the industry when there might be market research or something like that that encourages the use of creative names?
Yeah. So basically, what I've kind of noticed as far as I haven't done it's hard to find actual sales numbers and things like that. That was kind of beyond the scope of what I wanted to do. But just from my observations as a consumer and someone who's an active participant in this industry, what really matters is the marketing of what the foundation is supposed to do and like the name of the actual product itself rather than the names of the shades. People aren't usually looking at that unless it's literally just something to help them remember when they go back and buy it, but I don't think that's even always the case. So my argument is more, this is not something, in general, this is not something that's helpful to consumers. And I wasn't able to do any survey work, but I have talked to, over the course of this project, lots of people who do purchase regularly. I'm in a Facebook group that has like 50,000 members, and I ran like a mini survey in there just asking, what do you think about this? And people are like, no, I never think about that. So I would be surprised if there was any research on it, and I would love to see it done. But just overall, I don't think that there's a reason to continue the practice. And I think we're out of time, but thank you guys so much for your questions. On to the next one.